Hello. I thought I might make just a short, well, hopefully short, little bit of video for you, just to talk about the first of our weekly discussions. And this one, as you know, is on self-leadership. The best bit of all, leading self. Why is that? Because I think often when we think, and particularly for you, knowing you're coming into this particular program where we're talking about leadership in general, you think, oh, it's about what I do with others, how I do that for others. And yet, what I've learned through hard knocks experience in roles which you call leadership roles, and also through my study and research, is that we cannot lead anyone else until firstly we understand and lead ourselves. Makes sense, doesn't it, really, when you think about it? So whilst we will talk about leading others, and that will happen in the following week, the material for this week was all about leading ourselves. And so there's quite a bit on that. And I thought I'd just do a quick summary. And so forgive me, I've made a few notes because there's quite a bit of material, as you would know. Now, first of all, though, I've asked you to do two things. I've sent you an invitation to undertake the octogram test, and I hope that more will have done it by the time we get to next Wednesday. Meantime, back at the ranch. So if you haven't received that invitation, have a look in your junk mail, because I sent it to all of the registered email addresses. So if you're getting other emails, you'll know that has actually been sent to you, and it may not have been recognised because it comes under online talent manager, and your particular filter may throw it into junk mail. So have a look there if you haven't received it. The other thing I asked you to do, and I sent you the link, is the Johari window, and that's at www.kevin, but it's kevan.org/Johari. And you go into there, you find the 5 descriptors best suited to you. Maybe you're agile, maybe you're enthusiastic, maybe you're intellectual, maybe whatever. They're all positive words anyway. You choose 5, takes 2 secs. Then you have created an address for yourself, which you then use to send out to everyone you can possibly think that might know you. New friends, old friends, because each will have a perspective of you, and that's a way of building the Johari window, and that will give you another sense, an insight, how other people see you as opposed to how you see yourself. And if they're all aligned, we'll go into that on Wednesday. Anyway, so those 2 things I'm hoping you will do before Wednesday. Then you'll have seen on the website 1,000,001 things you need to do. And I'm just going to run through them. I don't want you to be overwhelmed, because there is a lot of material, and it's all useful and interesting, but let's just have a quick run through in case you don't have time. Now, the first thing I popped on there is a new video, which was an interview with Dr. Ramona Vijay Arasa, who has studied, and it's entitled The Woman President. And it's a really interesting study because she looks at Asian countries as opposed to the good old American, Western kind of leadership. She looks at the Asian, the Philippines, Philippines, Indonesia and Sri Lanka, I think, are the 3 countries who've all had women leaders and have done amazing things. And what we're just starting to do now in, say, Australia, these countries did it in 2004, with a woman as a leader. And she talks about how that impacted on fast-tracking policy changes that supported women in more. So that's a very interesting one. And she also has created a tool that I'd like you to have a look at. Anyway, so we'll move from that particular video, which goes for ages. So, it's something that you can watch later if you like, if you're interested. But I wanted to add some fresh material that spoke more to a diverse community rather than all this American Harvard business the white man kind of stuff, which a lot of MBA programs have in the past have used, which sounds reasonable, but now it's ridiculous because we have such a diverse group of people and there's so much more we can learn, as Dr. Ramona Vijayaramasa certainly explains and highlights. Anyway, so then we talk about, or you see there's lots of very many different definitions to what leadership is. And I would like to highlight what I think is really a simple way of understanding leaders and leadership. And that is that the word leader, which you may or may not have associated with yourself, is a noun, it's a label. It's like teacher, it's like a mother, it's like daughter. It's a noun, it describes that title, that label. Leadership, on the other hand, doesn't do that. It's a doing word, it's a verb. It says that it's a way of having a leadership behaviour is an action that highlights leadership or a leader's qualities. But anyone can have leadership behaviours but not have the label or the title, the noun, being a leader. And I think we saw that, for example, really simply in the disasters in Australia recently, the floods, etc., and prior to that, fires and whatever, where the community became leadership behaviour oriented. They just took it upon themselves to rescue people, to do stuff, because governments were sadly not fast enough to respond to the floods, say, recently. So it's a good example of the difference between leader and leadership. They can be both together, but leadership as a behaviour doesn't need to have a title of leader. So that's my differentiation. What else have we got here? There were a couple of first recommended readings, and one was on the evolution of leadership, and that was by Hunt et al. And they talked about traits and behaviours, and they talked about authentic and environmental influences as a later evolution of leadership. So, authenticity is something that we're going to look at and talk about. And, of course, environmental influences, which are what they believe now are more interchangeable than in the past, where there were very strict identifiers of what leaders were. We'll talk about hero leaderships in a minute. Another good example of the difference, say, between leadership and management, which the next author talks about. There's two readings. One's by Hunt, etc., and the other is by Gavin in 2019. And he talked about leadership and management. And in that particular case, I like to make another simple analogy of the difference between the two. And the one is, say, a leader in the context of adaptive leadership, which is has its own theoretical model. Adaptive leadership says the leader moves or shifts. The only role of a leader is to shift the status quo, is to move from what is to what could be. And a manager maintains the status quo. Neither is good or bad, and sometimes they go together, but they are very different behaviours or actions. So the manager is tasked with the role of best practice of what they're doing. Yeah? They do that, they manage all of those things, the administration. It's the status quo, it's what's happening right now. They manage that. Leadership, on the other hand, stops with what's currently happening and wants to break that and shift it forward. It can be quite unpopular, it can be quite risky, and you can lose friends when you shift the status quo. But that, in adaptive leadership, is the only thing, the only role. Now, I know I'm at 10 minutes, so I best keep moving. The next two articles, one was Wheatley and Freeze, and Margaret Wheatley talks about the hero to host, talking about the hero leader, and she quotes a writing that says it's time for heroes to go home, that we don't need the hero leader. And she also highlights, which I was talking about with the adaptive leadership model of not being terribly popular when you shift the status quo. She also talks about the pressure people put on who they think is the leader to solve the problem for them, whereas in fact we can all solve the problems, and we get much more buy-in when everyone's taking leadership behaviours as the driver for adapting and changing. So that's those two articles. And we move on to the next part, which is around empathetic listening. And that particular article talks about, and I think there's there might be a video with that one, I'm not sure. And it's about the difference between, firstly, empathy and sympathy. And we know it implicitly, but sometimes having to actually describe what the difference is. And I'll give you my difference, and that is that sympathy is about our own perspective. You say, what's something? My mother is moving in with us, and I go, oh, that's fantastic, because I'm thinking about my perspective, my experience, and they go, well, actually, no, it's not, because I've got a young baby and she's got health issues and I don't have the time. So in other words, empathy is about putting yourself in their shoes and saying, how is that for you? How do you feel about that? You don't impose your thoughts and experience on someone. You ask and you empathise with where they are. So that's the difference. It's simple, it's easy. So that's what empathy is. And we talk about, in that particular article, they're talking about listening to ourselves first, then being able to listen to others and being able to understand and move in and out of what are they saying and how are they saying it and what am I feeling, and therefore we can kind of become very attuned to both our behaviours and actions as we're listening and focusing on what the other is saying. And it's quite a complex thing, but so that's another one that we can talk about on Wednesday if we have time. Then there's a video from Brene Brown. She's being interviewed. It's very short and it's about her podcast, Dare to Lead. She's brilliant. You'll love her. If you haven't had an occasion to hear her, go onto Google and just Google her, because there's the best TED Talk on vulnerability. I think it's had like 30 or 40 million hits. It's a big, popular TED Talk from way back now, but it's brilliant, and I use it always in my MBA classes on leadership. So yes, so Brene Brown, she's talking about the fact that a leader, when you go into a corporation, they're not necessarily easy to spot, even in the big offices, that she says that leadership is a shared notion of everyone can be a leader or have leadership behaviours. And she describes a leader as being accountable, having courage, having guts. She said we need braver leaders. That was the result of her research, that overwhelmingly people said what we need are braver leaders. And she said that those leaders have about 4 or 5 things that they need to be able to do. One was vulnerability, to lean in to being vulnerable. to live to their values. So know your values and live into them. Trust, to build trust with everyone, and to reset, to be able to reset after failure, to be able to learn from your failures and build them into your growth. And then there's a YouTube by Lars Sudman, and he talks about, I guess, some really high-level views of how to understand and be able to manage to find your own leadership ability. And he talks about some great leaders in the past and asks you to find or recall a great leader and a bad leader, and be able to measure yourself against those. And about investing in self-leadership. So he talks a bit about that. That's a short but interesting video. But that's about it for, they say, that's about it. It's a lot of work to read all of that and to do your reflections. And as I say, don't be overwhelmed. Don't have to do it all. Please try and undertake those two tools, the octagram and Johari window, because that talks about self-awareness, about how we can't lead ourselves until we understand who we are to an extent. And that's a lifelong journey, of course. At 16 minutes, I'm going to close now. I'm going to see you on Wednesday. Hopefully I'll be able to upload this and won't be too large. So catch you on Wednesday. See ya. Bye.